Well, there have been few people that have defended the mission in Afghanistan more stridently than Terry Glavin. He is an admitted man of the left, and that puts him at odds with many people. His new book, right here, Come From the Shadows, is out, and he is speaking in Ottawa. There's the full screen. Come From the Shadows. It is about his experiences in Afghanistan. He is a freelance journalist and an instructor in Victoria, BC, and he's joining us in Ottawa now. Terry, welcome to the studio. Thanks for coming in.
Me, Brian.
You're kind of offside of the people on your own political side, but also a lot of people on the right now are starting to say, what are we accomplishing there? Why are we there? And I find myself more and more saying the same thing and wondering, but you've got a different view in your book.
Well, I don't know. I think people should ask that question, actually. I think people should constantly ask that question, what the hell are we doing there exactly? What are we doing there? But I think if you actually want, rather than rhetorical answers, if you actually want some evidence about what we have been doing in the enormous democratic space that Canadian soldiers particularly, I think, have managed to open up in Afghanistan, and you look inside that democratic space and you see what we've been doing and what the Afghan people have been doing, it's really quite astonishing. It'd take your breath away, actually. It's a really remarkable story.
Have we heard those stories, though? We hear occasionally about the school, we hear about the dam that Canada built, but mostly we've heard about deaths.
Yeah. I mean, the sort of genesis of the book was I was actually more interested in that. I was interested in why we don't hear Afghan voices, why we don't hear the story of the country. I was interested more in writing a book about the way we talk about Afghanistan and how strange it is, because how that Absurdistan, if you like, is so different from the real country. The way we talk about Afghanistan bears very, very little relationship at all to the country that actually exists there. The basic story, just the basic facts, will often come as an astonishment to many Canadians who might actually, good people, by the way, who might think they're informed on the subject, but aren't.
Well, you take issue with the fact that it's always described as tribal, that it's Pashtun against others, and so on. Do we have the wrong image of the country?
Oh, totally, absolutely and completely. We have the wrong story, I think, running in our heads. There's a kind of a mood music that plays that is very comforting to, I don't want to sound uncharitable, but rich white liberals. That reassures, confirms a lot of prejudices and bigotries that I think we have that we don't acknowledge and interrogate. All I know, I'm a prisoner of what I know, and what I know is that, for instance, we always talk about, we're imposing our Western values on them. I don't know any Canadians. I don't know any Canadians who have taken risked their lives on a daily basis for all of those values that we claim some kind of special entitlement to as Westerners, in the way that Afghans have, the right to go to school, the rights to a transparent and democratic and accountable government, the right to open a stall in a market without having to pay a bribe. The vast majority of Afghans, I mean the overwhelming majority of Afghans, they're now the most studied people in all of Central Asia, support the right of women to work outside of the home, support the right of girls to go to school, support the right of women to run for political office. Only a tiny minority of the Afghan people, a tiny minority, support the Taliban. The story I'm trying to tell here is the Afghan story and their struggle for democracy, which has been unfolding in different ways for generations now, was quite intensive from the early 1960s on. There was a terrible interregnum with the Soviet intervention, and the entire story of Afghanistan, particularly over the last 25 years, has been a story of Afghan people attempting to build and defend a sovereign and democratic Afghan republic, and their bravery would take your breath away, and we rarely hear that story.
I spoke to a couple of journalists who had been to Afghanistan for their respective news organizations, and I won't name the organizations because I don't want to get the journalists in trouble, but they were frustrated. They were sent to Afghanistan, and they thought that they would be telling stories like you're telling, going out, talking to the people.
They were stuck in CAF, I bet.
They were stuck in Kandahar airfield
Yeah.
and told, you can't go outside the wire, because if you do and you're out for 2 days interviewing villagers about some project and somebody dies, we're going to miss that, and you've got to be there. Have the editors back home robbed the journalists of being able to tell their stories and robbed Canadians of hearing them?
Yeah, I spent 15 years working for daily newspapers, and I've been in strange parts of the world on assignment, but I don't beat up on the media. I do deal with this issue a lot. It's actually quite complicated. I think what we do have to acknowledge is that at any given time, since Canada moved down to Kandahar in 2006, while there's all these rotations of journalists that do these sort of brief 2-week embedments from community newspapers all over the country, at any given time there's no more than 2 or 3 Canadian journalists in Afghanistan. And they're in CAF. They're embedded in Kandahar. And now, if you can imagine the Canadian image of the United States of America, if all we knew about that country were the reports that we were getting filed back to us from 2 or 3 Canadian journalists riding around in the back of a police wagon in the darkest and bleakest streets of Detroit.
That would be different.
Right? So, I mean, I spent some time, and don't get me wrong, there's a lot of really great and brave journalists. You know, I don't want to start listing them because, there's at least 5 or 6 who I think have done tremendous work.
There's been some
Christy
great work.
Blatchford, Rosie DiMano, Matthew Fisher, my gosh.
Yeah.
But the thing is, they don't get... This book is about what's happening outside the wire. I spent a little bit of time... I spent a little bit of a time down at CAF. But the whole book is outside the wire, and it's about the democratic space that our soldiers have opened up there. That's the thing to keep your eye on.
Okay, so the book is Come From the Shadows by Terry Glavin. Make sure that you pick it up. We'll put a link to it on lillyspad.ca so you know where to find it.